Stay here. I'll wander around. I think I'll stay here. I'm okay. I thought it was going to be crowded, but oh well. So what I have to say is thank you so much. I will never hear that song the same way again. When you said, I'm going to do sukiyaki, I was like, oh. But isn't that true of appearances, right? We think one thing, and then all of a sudden it's put into perspective, and everything changes. Everything changes. So a couple weeks ago, I was at a theology conference. Andrea has suggested that I say I went to a theology conference that just happens to be called Theology Beer Camp, but that's beside the point. So I have this thing that I've been doing since I can even remember, but consciously doing since my 20s, which was I have this belief, this fantasy, that each and every one of us have taken what's known as the vow of the Bodhisattva. It's a Buddhist term. And the Bodhisattva is one who seeks Buddhahood and then chooses to return, it says, and return and continue to take birth until it says the very blades of grass are redeemed. So it's a vow that says, I will seek to do and be my very best, and I will do it for the benefit of all living beings. And I'm sure that everyone has taken that vow. And if you're like me, you probably took it in a bar on a bet many lifetimes ago. But here we are nonetheless. And so kind of in that, I have this tradition that wherever I go, and it's kind of a philosophy of mine, whether I've been to Europe or wherever, last week I was in St. Paul, is there are two things that I always try to practice. One is to respect the local gods and to patronize the good restaurants. So I was in St. Paul, and not knowing much about St. Paul, I decided I would go to St. Paul Cathedral, which is magnificent. Anybody from St. Paul? Anybody been to the St. Paul Cathedral? You have. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Yeah, and it was interesting for me. It was really different from me because the Italian part of myself was raised Roman Catholic. So I went to this thing, and it's truly beautiful, but it reflects the culture, as all spiritual practices and all spiritual rituals and ceremonies do. They're reflective of a culture. And one of the things that struck me about this cathedral, first of all, it was very beautiful. It was probably built primarily by German Catholics, which are very different from Italian Catholics on some levels. And it was mostly gray, primarily stone, these large statues, primarily of men, apostles and teachers and fathers of the church, and all this other, and it had this gray majesty and somberness to it. And I thought about that in reflection to my own childhood, growing up. Like I said, the Catholic part of myself was Italian, and I remember going to Our Lady of the Rosary, which is in the Italian part of San Diego, and it's anything but that. There are more colors than a kaleidoscope, and there are statues, and there's flowers, and there's candles, and when we went to New York, and there was in the Italian area there, there's ceremonies, there's parades, there's all these kinds of things going on. I remember this church, and in the church, all the women and children are sitting in the pews, the women bedecked in jewelry, and all the men are standing behind in suits and sunglasses. It was like a scene out of The Godfather. It was really pretty. But there was this, for us, there was All Souls Day, which is what today happens to be. And the festivals that went around, and the candles, and even in our own home, and stories that were told. And then growing up in Southern California, of course, we're deeply, deeply influenced by Mexico and South America. And you go to Tijuana, you go to any town or city in Mexico today, there are altars almost on every street corner. They're everywhere. There's flowers. By the way, a very cool field trip to do today is go to the Masonic Cemetery because they do Day of the Dead superbly. But anyway, so there's flowers, and there's ceremonies, there's music, there's food, there's picnics, there's all this kind of stuff going on. And I realize that that's kind of my world too. And it's a way that we sit with this idea of what this day is. And whether it is Samhain, if you come from a Wiccan tradition, or All Souls, if you come from a European Catholic tradition, or Day of the Dead, Dias de los Muertos, if you come from a Latino tradition, it's interesting that they're all kind of around this period of time, this sort of this liminal place that we're in. There's something about that. Diana Butler Bass, in her book A Beautiful Year, writes it this way. She says, "These are the liminal days, a betwixt time, when earth is neither fully one thing or the other, and the veil between time and space thins. At the threshold of what has been and what will be, we more fully understand both the miracle of resurrection and the mystery of death." So if we allow ourselves to have this kind of experience to our own discernment, we may have the experience of what it means to be in liminal time. So I'm going to say a couple things twice because they're really important for me, and I want to share them as just kind of part of what I've been working on this whole week as I sit with this. And the first one is this. Plato says the soul is erotic. The soul, and what he means, he doesn't mean that the soul is sexual in that sense, but the soul is visceral, it's feeling oriented. What motivates the soul is desire. And that the soul is longing, yearning, desiring unity with the Holy One, Ein Sof, that which is all things. And so in each and every one of us, conscious or unconscious, however we work with it, there's a yearning, a desire in each and every one of us that is active. And where we direct it, how we play with it, and again, I don't want to get too Catholic today, but allow me to get a little Catholic today. If you think in terms of Dante and the Divine Comedy, what we see in the different stages, whether it's in the Inferno or Purgatory or the land of the blessed, is what happens when those desires are given fulfillment. Because in Dante's world, the Inferno is simply getting what you want for eternity. Where is your yearning? Where is your desire? Where is your attention? Because that's what manifests. And the other thing I'm going to probably repeat a couple times, as well as this, is that the soul is erotic, is that we experience the transcendent world, the spirit world, the liminal world through our imagination. Because we are talking about something that is not in a physical body, it doesn't reveal itself to us as a physical form, but rather within our own discernment and our own experience and our own imagination. And our imagination is predicated on our perception of things, meaning that if we keep our perception on a tight leash, our imagination will be held at a tight leash. If we let our perception go off and maybe asks questions like, what if? Could this be possible? How about? Those kinds of things create the opportunity for the imagination to express more, expand more. It creates a deeper vehicle. So when I was a kid, we thought we were the Jetsons. That's how modern we thought we were when this song was being sung, Sukiyaki. And we had like a color TV, and we had this big antenna on our house. And we had this dial in our living room. Does anybody remember this? So when you turned on one of the 3 channels, I think there was only 3 at the time, you turned the channel, then you went to this dial and you turned it, and all of a sudden this very fuzzy, snowy picture would become clearer and clearer and clearer as it got dialed in. And then when you went to the next thing, it would dial in, But in many ways, that's kind of like our imagination. how we dial it in, how we direct our own perception through our own conscious mind. So I just want you to hold those two thoughts, that there is a yearning in us, and we can experience more of this world and the world that we don't see or perceive by our capacity to sit with an open imagination. So I just invite those two kinds of things to just kind of sit with. So, as I said, this is sort of a liminal time, and it's interesting that seasonally it is for so many, and it's going between one or the other. And we have sort of in our culture, we've sort of commercialized it and Americanized it, and we've made it spooky as opposed to being comfortable with death. Because in many ways we dance with death. On a day like this, we remember it. But we don't remember it like, who's afraid to die? And that's a big thing. And we sit with this idea of what mortality means, and that is something that we're all going to kind of embrace. But we look at it, our own life, is it finished? And the life of others, are they finished? There's really interesting, I've once read or heard that a ghost is the presence of an absence. It's something missing, but you can feel that it's missing. It's not there, and it being not there is there. You kind of with me on this one? So T. Susan Chang, who is an author that I like in the realm of things swirly, she writes this. She says, "Where does a shadow come from? From standing in the sun, no shadow. Wherever we go, as long as we are living, we carry our shadows with us. It's the negative space cast by our presence in life. It's a prerequisite and a corollary of our being here. In full daylight, our shadow invites us to contemplate the whole left behind when we are gone. You don't simply vanish, you leave an imprint, a memory, a U-shaped shadow in the hearts of those who love you. To thrive in life is to cultivate the shadow. The brighter the light, the stronger the loss." And this morning, what we're doing is we're creating an altar to honor the shadows of the loss that we feel, of those whom we loved and were loved by, who were important to us, whether they were four-legged or two-legged or whatever the case may be, but they cast a shadow. Their light, their presence is so strong in our life that when they were gone, we feel that presence. And what I'm going to invite us just to consider is that today is a day we can allow ourselves to be in touch with that experience. Something I did today that I don't often do is I opened the doors in the narthex, kind of symbolically to say, what if we opened the doors of perception? What if we opened the doors of invitation? What if the marigolds do create something? What if all these kinds of things in our imagination, would it be possible for us to simply invite those who have parted, that have cast a shadow, a greater shadow, where we experience a loss, that we can, just for this today at least, invite that in? Been reading a lot about C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis had this really interesting experience of death when his wife died. He wrote a book on it. Really, it's more of a journal. It's called A Grief Observed. And grief is an interesting word, is it not? It comes from the Latin word gravare, which means a heavy burden. So grief there's a heaviness about grief. it's a burden that we carry. And I kind of want to explore that a little bit, but before I go into that, I want to speak just momentarily about the inevitability of death itself. You know, in Tolkien, of course I'm going to mention Tolkien, he writes that when Iluvatar created the living, us, humanity, we were given the gift of mortality. And what went sideways with us is that we were seduced into being afraid of it, as if it was something unnatural, as opposed to something that's quite natural. And sometimes even natural things create grief or sadness because something is giving way for something else to happen. And Lewis experienced that, and he wrote at the very beginning of his book, he says it this way, he says, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning, I keep on swallowing." And we've experienced that, right? When we felt grief, there is something physical that goes on. And he goes on to say this, and he says, "And no one ever told me about the laziness of grief, except at my job, where the machine seems to run as much as usual. I loathe the slightest effort. Not only writing, but even reading a letter is too much, even shaving. What does it matter now whether my cheek is rough or smooth?" So there's a natural preponderancy for us to feel things that feel like fear, that feel like laziness, because they're visceral. We feel them. The soul is erotic. We feel the desire, the longing, and the loss. And what I want to say is, I don't want to say that's a good thing, but I want to just invite us to kind of sit with that because this was the death of C.S. Lewis's wife was a huge faith crisis for him. And like he wrote, he says, it wasn't the faith crisis of asking myself, is there a God or is there not a God? He says, I worked that one out already. He says, that wasn't the crisis for me of whether or not there was a God or not. But the crisis is if there is death, what kind of God is this? What kind of God is it that allows death and loss and sorrow? And I think that that's a very interesting theological conversation to go, to do kind of a deep dive. And obviously we don't have all the time on this, but I think we sit with that. Each and every one of us has to come to grips with that experience. What kind of thing is love if love includes loss? Because it does. And it does at every level of our growth. Whether it is the loss of a neighborhood or a friend or going to school and having to give up certain things, our life is a series of transitions. And we become attached to those experiences and we feel the loss of those things gone. And the life of those whom we love creates a space for us that is disorienting, confusing. It feels like fear, it feels like this, it feels like that, it feels like so many things. And yet what Lewis was able to come with is this, is that, first of all, we let go of this idea of some mental, unmoving, unreproachable, omniscient kind of God, but begin to experience God as deeply relational and deeply feeling and deeply connecting to us and desiring and longing us as much as we are desiring and longing it. As I say time and time and time again, the truest thing about each person in this room is that your name is known, you are seen, and you are loved by the very presence that created all that is, however it did it and whatever we know it to be. But the presence of it is love. And that we grieve is evidence that we love. And the deeper we grieve, the deeper that we love, or the deeper evidence of that. And so then the question is, what is left behind? Where are we now? You know, Lewis said something also that was really interesting. He says, if you want to talk to me about God and science and, those kinds of things, I'm all ears. I'm totally into it. He says, if you want to talk to me about what religion does this and what religion does that, I'm all ears. But don't talk to me about how religion consoles you. Because if you do, it simply means that you haven't been there. Because anybody and everybody who has experienced grief knows the last thing they want to hear from anybody is, God needed another angel. It was meant to be. Whatever those kinds of things are, they don't work. Not when we're grieving. They don't work. What works is being seen. That's all. We don't have to fix anything. We just need to be. There's this beautiful story in the Gospel of St. John where Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane because he's very aware of what's going to be happening. Not because of some kind of thing. He knew he had challenged empire. And empire in this world gets its way. And he knew what was inevitably going to happen. And he was hours before his arrest. He was hiding out, kind of probably going through this, my God, what have I done? And all he can say to his disciples isn't, let's get our swords, let's run away, let's do this, let's do that. What he simply says is, can you stay awake with me? Can you stay awake with me? That's all. And I think that that's true for us. When someone that is in our community or someone who is in our life that we love and they are grieving, we don't need to fix them. There's no words that can be said that can fill that void. But what we can do is be present and to love them and to see them and to beware. And perhaps maybe even God itself is present and seeing. And what if we could, in those moments, allow ourselves this kind of imagination? So I'm going to offer you something this morning, and that is, I do this thing where I do memorials for people, and sometimes I do often I do memorials for people that I don't even know. But I get to know them through the experience of the family members, the friends, whoever they may be, and they share these stories, and it's fascinating. Kind of like what Enrique said, every candle that is burning here is a remarkable story to be told, a remarkable story to be told. And we remember those, and we're with those, and we wait. But what if just for a moment, on this day, what if there was another possibility? And I'm going to invite you to just, if it feels comfortable for you, just to close your eyes and let yourself just be present in this room. And just to feel it. And what if the marigolds, the thinning of the veil of the two worlds, the open doors, the candles, the attention, what if all of that creates the space for those whose candles are lit on this altar to literally come into the room and be present with us here? We can feel the air and we can hear the different sounds. It's just this incredibly beautiful day and all of our senses are so alive. And what if we can just even allow ourselves just to be present to that feeling, and that person, those persons, that animal, whoever it was, is able to come visit us just for a few moments here and now in this room. And if they did, and if they were present here, what would you want them to know about you now? What would you want them to know? And ask them. Ask them right now. And listen for that answer. And maybe even you can ask them, what is it that you want to know about them now? To listen to them. What are they saying to you? What do they want you to know? So we just take this moment in gratitude to bless this time, to be deeply aware of all that we feel, to be deeply aware of the love that is in this room on so many levels, remembering those whom we love and we receive love from, thinking about what it is that they want us to know and what we can know. And in closing, I offer this prayer, this poem from Mary Oliver. Still, what I want in my life is to be willing to be dazzled, to cast aside the weight of facts, and maybe even float a little above this difficult world. I want to believe I am looking into the white fire of a great mystery. I want to believe that the imperfections are nothing, that light is everything, that it is more than the sum of each flawed blossom rising and fading. Light is everything, and I do.